Yes, yes.
I think now we're live.
Yes, we are. And someone is recording too.
Yeah. We'll give it a minute, I guess. Okay, I think we should start. All right. So welcome everyone to this round of Wijhet Nazar. I am Bilal Mlaab. I'm a postdoctoral fellow at the London School of Economics and co-founder of Impact Lebanon. Wijhet Nazar brings together activists, independent politicians, and experts to discuss topics dividing the Lebanese society. In addition to spreading awareness, the aim is to encourage healthy debates and discussions in the community. This is a collaborative initiative between Impact Lebanon and Coffee and Politics. Impact Lebanon is a London-based initiatives hub aimed at promoting active citizenship through a collaboration between the diaspora and local entities to drive incremental change in Lebanon. It's a platform that allows active members and those who wish to become active to bring their ideas and tap into a community and resources to make them happen. The strength of Impact Lebanon is in connecting people that share similar aims, values, and complement each other's expertise to make an initiative a success. So I urge you all to check out Impact Lebanon on various social media. Coffee and Politics is an independent political discussion platform aiming at reopening the political dialogue between the Lebanese citizens. I also urge you to check out their fascinating work. So the topic of today's debate is whether the government plan has distributed the losses fairly. Now, we all agree that Lebanon is in the midst of a perfect storm. We were in a situation of a large fiscal deficit, an open current account, and pegged and overvalued exchange rate, and this was clearly not sustainable. But today's debate seems as much about the politics of the crisis as it is about the economics of it. Indeed, the crisis in large part is the result of political mismanagement, embezzlement of resources, and what have you. So now we are where we are today, and there are clear losses. The question is who will bear the burden of replenishing the hole in the financial system. So some argue that the culprits are the politicians or the political class who have stolen public assets and therefore will need to recover those somehow. Others point fingers at the banks who have made supernormal profits over the years by lending to the states, knowing full well, of course, that it was ailing, or allegedly knowing that it was ailing. But I think we all agree, or many claim to agree, that the depositors in their largest proportion are at no fault in this conundrum. We can also argue that the banks and the state are one. Indeed, there are some studies and opinions that show, and facts, in fact, that show the intertwinement between the banks and the state. So on April 30, the government announced its economic recovery plan, which was billed as a reform for support package. The plan made big promises in fiscal reform, in monetary policy, on bail-ins and bailouts, and other essential reforms for Lebanon. All of which looked excellent on paper, or some of which looked excellent on paper and indeed. But the main question was on implementation and execution. And we've seen what happened in the aftermath. Now, the claim that there will be no haircut on depositors is now, of course, a moot point, because effectively the multiple exchange rates in the system make it such that there is a de facto exchange rate on many. And the central bank is busy crossing liabilities off its balance sheet by printing Lebanese lira. And we, of course, see an erosion of Lebanese citizens and Lebanese residents purchasing power as we enter hyperinflation territory. So it's all pretty bleak, yet the people in power can't seem to agree on the numbers. A separate parliamentary committee was formed and proposed a plan, in fact, and IMF negotiations have been faltering. So today we are delighted to be joined by Dr. Henri Shaawoul, who was part of the team who engineered the government plan, and Mr. Nassib Ghobriel, the chief economist of Byblos Bank, to debate a number of issues. Of course, the main debate topic is whether the government plan distributed the losses fairly, but there are many nuances to this question. So what is, for example, a fair distribution, and how does it look like? What kind of structural reforms do we need, and are they achievable in the current socio-political climate? And why have the numbers of the losses become Wijhet Nazar? And we seem to have a lot of conflict of interest in parliament, in government, in the banking association, and in many stakeholders in this issue. So the final question will be, how can we align these interests for the good of the people? And is that indeed possible? So now we'll kick off the debate. We'll start with a poll that will show on the bottom of your screens. This is really to get a sense of the audience's position or their Wijhet Nazar. And this will happen before the debate, and we'll have another one at the end. The structure of the debate will be such that 5 minutes for each speaker to make their opening statement. And then we will have a round of questions and rebuttals to the speakers for 45 minutes. This is followed by 25 minutes of Q&A, where you can ask questions through the Q&A box again below. And we'll end with the results of the polls, both the one that we're seeing now and the one that we'll see at the end. And we'll conclude this debate. So once again, I'd like to welcome both our debaters today, Dr. Henri Shaawoul and Mr. Nassib Ghobriel. And without further ado, I'll give the floor to Henri first for his opening remarks, and then we'll move to Nassib. Thank you.
Thank you, Bilal. First, it's unfair that we cannot vote on that poll. So anyways, I know my first comment has to be an apology to everyone. I know that this is the third time, and to Nassib also in particular, this is the third time we're trying to schedule this talk, and the 2 times we have canceled and postponed was actually due to me. So apologies for that. So just some introductory remark. I hope that today the intention is to have a very honest conversation about it, and to put aside all the populist comments and all the populist views regarding the government plan or the current situation in Lebanon. I think we owe it to the people. We owe it. I'm sure that I was told there's about 180 people who are listening to the talk, and I'm sure a lot of them are depositors. People are concerned about what's going to happen to the economy. Some people are wondering whether they should leave the country or not. Whatever, there's a lot of these people. We owe people the truth, and that's the most important part, no matter how hard it is. And obviously, I'm here, and I don't represent any party. I'm a Lebanese citizen. So in terms of the government reform plan, first you have to understand what this plan, when we put it together, what it is about. Number one, it was intended to be a comprehensive plan. So it was intended to be, for the first time, I think, in the recent history anyway of Lebanon, I've seen a plan that was comprehensive. It was intended, it had the intention of being a plan that will be compatible with an IMF perspective, because that was the strategy that was followed in terms of when we identified the need for international assistance and for hard currency. So no surprise that this plan is a plan that is going in that direction. Now, the plan has one characteristic in my mind. It's a plan that I consider to be fair, and I will explain that, and we will have a whole hour to discuss that. And I think anyone who is stating otherwise is reading one part of the plan without reading the other. So it is extremely important to be able to read the plan in its entirety and then to provide the judgment, because the cursor can be moved anywhere in the plan, and I think it's important to understand that. So the fairness is one, but also what is very important is the vision of a Lebanon 2.0 in this plan. Yes, this plan is, if implemented, extremely bold, is going away from the traditional economic model of Lebanon. Lebanon, don't kid yourself. Lebanon is not a liberal economy today. Lebanon is an oligarchy. That's what Lebanon is. That is our economic model. You pointed, Bilal, earlier to the connection that exists between banks and the political class. Unfortunately, that has been the hallmark of the economy over the last 30 years. So let me go back to the government plan. The government plan, you have to look at it with all the pillars. I know most of the focus has been only on one, which is the financial sector restructuring, which is a sector I come from, which is a sector I spend enormous amount of time in. But there's also a fiscal reform program, there's a fiscal policy adjustments, there's a monetary policy pillar, there's a debt restructuring pillar, and as importantly, there is a structural reforms pillar. All these pillars have to be taken together. So what I say when what I mean by saying that you have to read the plan in its entirety, I mean by that if you want to just discuss the financial restructuring pillar by itself and assume that the fiscal pillar is not there and the monetary pillar is not there and all the other one, then obviously it doesn't stand on its own legs. So if reforms do not take place, yes, of course, we cannot continue to have a discussion on the financial restructuring sector reform in the way we are discussing it today. So reforms have to happen, no doubt about it. And nothing has to happen before the other one. All these things have to happen at the same time. What the plan is not, the plan, and a lot of pieces of the plan have been demonized. The plan has been discussed as being against the banking sector. No, the plan is not at all against the banking sector. The plan is not saying we do not need a banking sector. The plan is saying we need a regulated banking sector. We need a banking sector that is responsible and that finances the private economy, not one that finances the public sector, okay? The plan has been described as a haircut plan, when in fact, when you look at the plan and whether we will reach a haircut or not, honestly, I don't have enough numbers in my toolbox to figure out what's going to happen. But there are a number of lines of defense that were put in this plan, and I'm sure we're going to talk about it later on in losses, so I'm not going to give all the points right now, and just in respect of time. But there are so many lines of defense that have been put before reaching the depositor. Also, at the same time, there is a participation of the state. We are not saying in the government plan that the state should not be able to participate. I think I'm running out of time. I will ask for one more minute if Nasib is kind enough to give me that.
Of course.
Thank you. And the final point I want to make is that the plan is taking a perspective that we cannot be in the freezer. Okay, we cannot continue the situation in which we are today. We need reforms, as I said today. But more importantly, we need to be extremely honest about our financial losses, about the health of our financial sector, and we need to take all the losses now. When I say we need to take the losses now, what I mean by that, we need to move them off balance sheet. And we can treat them over time. We can treat them over time. I don't have a problem with this issue of gradual treatment of those losses, but they need to be out of the financial system. So we need to figure out the procedure under which we do all that. And I had a point on quantification of losses, but I will mention that later on when we talk about losses. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ali. That was really interesting. The floor is yours, Nathi.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation and finally for having the debate as scheduled. I am present today at 8 p.m. Beirut time in my office because I'm concerned that if I'm at home, I will have electricity shortages and the internet would be so slow and so unreliable that we may get disconnected. That tells you in a nutshell the state of the Lebanese economy and how major sectors of the economy have been mismanaged by the successive governments so far. And that's where you should start. If we take a step back to the decision of the government to default on its foreign obligations, first of all, it was taken, I believe personally, under political pressure, under rampant populism, and under the pressure of anarchists in the country. And the proof of this is that it was not an organized default. It's the right of the government to take a decision and to sacrifice the credibility of the Lebanese state that it built over decades to honor its foreign obligations. And that resulted in sidelining Lebanon from the international financial and banking system. But it could have been done in a different way. First of all, 87% of countries who decide to suspend payments on their foreign obligations do it in conjunction with already existing negotiations with the IMF, or at the end of negotiations with the IMF and a program in place in a best case scenario. Second, when the government decides to take this decision, or when it starts debating to take this decision, it communicates, it reaches out to the holders of the Eurobonds, whether they are domestic institutions or foreign institutions. And in our case, this does not happen. That there was no discussion whatsoever, no outreach, no communication with the bondholders. And second, obviously the negotiations or the discussions with the IMF did not start until May. So already we're starting on the wrong foot in an environment where we already have a severe confidence crisis that started at the end of 2017, in my opinion, with disastrous government decisions that are politically and electorally motivated, like the massive across-the-board tax increase on consumption, on income, on capital gain, on fees with formalities with the government, and at the same time raising public expenditures through the increase in wages and salaries of the public sector without a proper estimate of the cost of this increase. That led to a massive redistribution. That tax increase led to the beginning of the liquidity crisis and to a massive redistribution of income from the private sector to the public sector. Knowing that we were suffering from a 7th year in a row of balance of payment deficit. You need to encourage capital inflows, not scare away capital with more taxes and more redistribution of income. So that's where the crisis of confidence started between the private sector on the one hand and the government at the time on the other hand. And we saw the liquidity crisis starting in 2018 by retailers delaying payments to wholesalers, wholesalers to distributors, distributors to importers, and so on. And then this confidence crisis expanded to the Lebanese expatriates, to the parts of the Eurobond holders who sold part of their holdings in 2008 and exited the market when the government was faced with an opportunity under the SAD conference with $11 billion in soft loans to finance the rebuilding of the infrastructure, but it did not take it seriously. And then you had the crisis with the diaspora. The crisis of confidence reached the diaspora in 2019 when they saw that it took 8 to 9 months to form a government without any serious reforms, and they started withdrawing their money from the banking sector and transferring them abroad. And last but not least, this crisis of confidence reached the Lebanese residents here, the citizens here, towards the last quarter of 2019. And we saw what happened with the rush on the banks. So you had a crisis of confidence that evolved into a crisis of confidence between the private sector, Lebanese citizens and the diaspora on one hand, and the government and political parties in power on the other hand. when the government took the decision to default on its foreign obligations, it was already in the middle of a confidence crisis that was exacerbated because of the two factors that I mentioned. But the government's plan, and then came the government's plan in itself, which was effectively, token reforms, because we know that since 2001, successive governments have pledged reforms to the international community, and more importantly to the Lebanese private sector and to citizens, and delivered only tax increases and increases on fees without any meaningful, any structural reforms. So now it's not surprising that the focus has been on the financial sector restructuring, because it essentially, the plan puts the entire burden, the entire cost on the financial sector, whether it's the commercial banks or the central bank. And the perception is that this plan puts the entire cost on the financial sector to avoid any meaningful reforms of the public sector and keep reforms cosmetic and shallow, given that the losses will be written off in one shot in a bookkeeping accounting approach. And that's where the skepticism is. That's where the skepticism originates, that the plan puts the entire cost on the financial sector to avoid any serious reforms of the public sector and of governance and of implementation of structural reforms.
Thank you so much. So what we've heard basically from Ari is that the plan cannot be taken piecemeal. It is a comprehensive reform package. It has multiple pillars, both fiscal, monetary, banking, etc. But it's a comprehensive plan, and we should not read into it with a cursor, basically. So we take it whole, or it doesn't work. And then what we heard from Nassib is that this is not a crisis of yesterday. This has been in the making for many years. What we're hearing, of course, is that the government is incompetent and will not be able to execute these reforms. The question is, what was the technical at the technical level, was the plan able to distribute the losses fairly? And I think we didn't really get that answer yet. So maybe let's start with the first question on what is a fair distribution of the losses. And in this section of the debate, we'll do 3 minutes interventions each, and then 2 minutes rebuttal afterwards. So why don't we start with Henri again?
May I ask a question? Are we going to have rebuttals or kind of a discussion on the introduction that we both provided? Because I think it will be useful for the people who are listening if we can take 2 or 3 minutes each to just discuss what was just presented. But it's up to you. I don't
know the plan, but we're happy to do that. Yes. Yeah, we can do a 2 minutes intervention each if you wish.
Okay, would be great if Nassib, you agree with that.
That's fine.
I think you know, I've listened to Nassib's description of events, and I'm not going to comment on all of it, but there are 2 points on which I agree with wholeheartedly, and there are 2 points where I disagree. The 2 points of agreement is the successive failures of government. That is completely true. The public sector has amazingly led us to where we are today. And it seems to me that this is continuing in the same direction, and we'll talk more about it later on. The second point of agreement is in terms of reforms, and that no reforms have been done. Since Paris 1, we promised reforms, we lied to the international community. Paris 2 came in, said, and 3 and said, and all that. However, I think the big disagreement I have is that the financial sector played a big role into financing this beast and making it grow so much that it became out of control. If you go back to the banking sector of the 1980s, you will see that this stuff was not there because there was a separation between those two risks. And I wish today, this problem we're having today, we had it like 20 years ago, because then it would have been more controllable. The 2 points of disagreement very quickly are the decision of default. The decision of default, I mean, I don't want to consider myself Pierre Robespierre and to be an anarchist, but I think it's really, it was so obvious that that was the only decision that made sense at that time. The liquidity that we had and the problem have started way before that decision was taken, started way early in 2019 where the banking sector had this liquidity. So I don't think it's the default that made it there. So these are very quick comments, and then thank you for allowing me to say that.
Thank you so much. Nassib, do you have anything to say on this, or shall we move to the next section?
Let's move to the next section.
Okay. So the first question will be, what is, in your opinion, a fair distribution of the losses? Why don't we start with Nassib in this round?
A fair distribution of the losses is to see what is the root of the causes that led us to the crisis of today. And the root of the crisis is the mismanagement of the public sector, is the lack of governance and transparency in public institutions, is the massive increase in public expenditures. Public expenditures increased by 150% between 2005 and 2019. And most of these years, the successive governments operated without a budget. It is again the lack of a serious will to implement any, even very basic reforms and very obvious reforms, maybe not to restructure the public sector, but at least to stimulate economic activity, to improve tax collection, to fight tax evasion, to improve the collection of fees, to fight customs evasion, to implement laws that are good on paper but are partially implemented and sometimes not implemented at all. So when the massive recruitment in the public sector, 31,000 persons were recruited in the public sector between 2014 and 2018, especially since 2000, especially after the end of 2017, when there was a law that specifically said to freeze public sector recruitment for at least 2 years in order to have a census to determine how many public sector employees we have. So the government, the politicians went and raised wages and salaries of the public sector without knowing how many public sector workers and employees and even retirees they have. This is where the mismanagement of sectors that the government monopolizes, like electricity, like telecoms, like water, like public transportation, and we see the results. Lebanese households have to pay 2 electricity bills, 3 water bills, the highest mobile cellular costs in the Arab world relative to income per capita. There's basically almost no public transportation. These are all indirect taxes, and this is the real root of the problem. So the public sector has to bear the majority of the cost to give credibility and confidence to the other segments that have to bear the remaining of the costs. I'm not saying that the public sector has to bear the only side that has to bear the cost, but you have to start with the roots of the problem. And the root of the problem is clearly the expansion of the public sector, the massive burden that the public sector has become on the economy and on households. As a result, we start with the public sector to give confidence to other sectors to move forward.
Thank you so much. So what we're hearing here is that the public sector needs to take the brunt of the crisis. They need to sort of bail the country out of this crisis. Although one can argue that the public properties are also taxpayers' properties, so it's not really the state that is giving out or sort of repenting its sins, but rather the people will still be paying. Henri, what do you think about the fair distribution of the losses?
Look, this is a very loaded question, right? And I'm surely will take more than 2 minutes, I tell you from now, to try to answer that. One thing that Nassib said, which is very correct, right? That this stuff has been going on for the last 30 years. or he didn't say 30 years, I'm saying 30 years. He said past successive governments. And there has been a party that has been going on, a party that has been where people spend money and some other people finance it. Who's sitting around this table? And now after 30 years, we have to pay the bill. That's effectively what's going on. And these are the losses that we're talking about. So who's on the table and who's responsible for all that? Well, you have, in my mind, in my view, you have three different participants. You have the state. Now, you have the state in terms of two different entities, if you want. The state as representative of the people, and you have the state as being the guarantor of no corruption, good governance, the right public policy, and so forth. And then you have the participant to the financial sector. So you have the shareholders and you have the depositors. So the question is, okay, now the bill came after so many years. Who's going to take the bill and who's going to pay the bill? I think we all agree to some extent that the last line of defense ought to be the depositors. I'm going to park that on the side for a second. When we say the state is responsible, of course, the state is responsible for providing stability in the financial system. The state is responsible to conduct all the audits, to be able to do all the reforms, to return any money that was stolen. And I'm very serious about that, because if we can't do that, then we need to talk about something completely different. We either want today to take the opportunity to build the right state or not. We don't solve the problem by going and dipping, for example, in state assets, which are the property of the people who are sitting on the table, also represented by the state, just because we can't find where else to finance the losses from. This cannot be, okay? So the people as such are not the ones that have benefited from the largesse of the state. They did to some extent, but not to the extent of what is being required of them today. And by the way, today, the people are the ones that are paying the price. There are two categories of people paying the price today, are people and depositors. Depositors are getting effectively haircuts every day, okay? People are paying the price through exchange rate, devaluation every day, and through hyperinflation. That's what is happening. While the rest of the people, right, the state is doing no reforms. I will continue to say that every 5 minutes so that people don't think, you know, I'm representing the government here. And the shareholders who have benefited of the banking sector, who have benefited from that largesse of the state also, have not taken a hit on that. No, now I know I'm out of time, so that's as much as I will go, because I really don't want to extend over time.
So why don't we go through a round of rebuttals now? Floor is yours, Nasib.
We have to remember, when we talk about the shareholders and the depositors, they seem to be the primary target of the government's plan, because if you look at their estimated losses, which is about 241 trillion Lebanese pounds, if you take the equity of the banking sector, of the entire banking sector, it's about 31 trillion pounds. So if you wipe it out completely, you still have the balance, about 210 trillion Lebanese pounds. Who's going to pay for it? That's obviously the depositors. There's no line of defense. There is no alternative to that. And these various options, when they say there is no haircut on deposits and the depositors will instead get a share in the banks, instead of the deposit that they lose, or get a share in those state funds that are looking to recover $10 billion in stolen funds. This is effectively a haircut, whether you like it or not, and it's restricting depositors' money. Now, if you look at some figures regarding the banks, cliche that they're financing the government to make money. First of all, if you look at the growth in public expenditures, treasury transfers to Électricité du Liban, the state-owned and money-losing utility, increased by 26% between 2010 and 2019. Debt servicing grew by 34.5% during the same period, while the compensation of public sector employees and workers in the public sector jumped by 100% during the same period, 100%. So you see where the expenditures have gone. If you look at the breakdown of public expenditures in 2019, the compensation of public sector employees and workers accounted for 40% of the total, followed by debt servicing at 33% and transfers to EDL at 9%. The compensation of public sector employees and workers absorbed 70% of public expenditures in the first 4 months of this year. Nobody wants to talk about that part. If you look at despite all of this, and if you look at the period between 2013 and 2019, you have those 7 years, the successive government in place managed to work normally. I'm not saying they were productive. They managed to work normally for a total of 2 years and 4 months. Those 7 years, you had 2.5 years of presidential vacuum, 11 months to form the government of Prime Minister Salam, 8 months to form the government of Hariri. And despite all of this, the weighted interest rates on outstanding treasury bills was 6.44% at the end of 2019. And the weighted interest rates on Eurobond was 7.4% at the end of 2019. So the role of the banking system, whether the central bank or commercial bank, was to maintain stability, monetary stability, and public finance stability, and therefore economic and social stability, until the authorities implement reforms. It was the responsibility of the banking sector to maintain stability. And frankly, these interest rates show that the banking system has saved the government a lot more in debt servicing than it has paid. And let's not forget that the interest that the banks generated, the interest rates that the banking sector generated, 2/3 of them went to depositors. They didn't go to the banks. 2/3 of them went to depositors. And 75% of the profits that the banks generated since the 90s, not in the past 4 years, were reinvested into the capital of banks. And that's why you have a banking equity of $21 billion at the official exchange rate at the end of 2019.
Thank you so much. Ari.
Just as a rebuttal on few points. Number one, I'm not going to get into the issue as to whether the banks have profited from that. The explanation that Nassib has given in terms of the growth in the capital, plus I will add to that the dividend that got distributed by the banks, will show how profitable that sector was. And given the exposure, the huge exposure they have on the public sector, they've been also the recipient of that largesse. Now, let me talk about the numbers that Nassib mentioned. He mentioned 241, which is an exact number, which, by the way, these numbers will keep on changing until the day we sign an IMF program, which hopefully, if it will ever come to fruition one day. But the version that was published, that's right, that's 241, but these are the gross losses. So in fact, when you look at the net losses that exist in the system, even after writing off the equity of the banks, that, as far as I'm concerned, and obviously you have to do bank by bank analysis, but if we are still at the aggregate level, we are left with 150 trillion. Now, what Nassib seems to forget, once again, is that the plan has a number of other cursors and a number of other lines of defense before getting to the depositors. And that's why I personally think that the depositors are not at all represented by either the government on one side or by the Association of Banks of Lebanon, by ABL. The depositor need to have a seat on the table so that they defend their interests, because the 154 can be financed through a number of other lines of defense. And I wonder, why the depositors are not there. Who's talking on their behalf? The fact to say that one of the parties that is going to be affected by the financing of the losses is speaking on behalf of someone that doesn't exist in the room is the most laughable idea. But if you take into account the amount of ill-gotten gains, if you take into account the excessive interest that will need to be taken into account here, or that have been paid especially over the last few years, if you take into account the reversal of financial engineering, just to understand how much was profited by whom, you add up all this and you will realize that yes, there may be something that the depositors will have to pay, but at the end of the day, it's not as large as people say. On the contrary, continuing in the policies that we have today, where every time we go to the bank, we are actually effectively getting a haircut. And we've been doing that for the last 7 months or 8 months, I stopped counting, as if it was a normal course of the day and if it was a normal way of acting. This is when you get a real haircut, and this is where the depositor and the people are paying the price rather than the other people who are sitting around the table. So I do think we need to get out of this comfort, and we need to get out of this policy of continuing doing things as we are doing today.
Thank you so much. This was very interesting, even if inconclusive in many ways, which is a very good reflection of how the country is at the moment. Let's move to a complementary bit of the question, which is on structural reforms. So, of course, that we have losses. We need to finance them somehow, but we also need to build back better. We need to also rebuild confidence. We need to attract, hopefully, capital. What kind of structural reforms do we need, and are they achievable? That's the first bit of the question. And the second bit, why haven't we seen anything start yet? So again, we start with you, Nassim.
That's a very good question, and I cannot overemphasize the importance of restoring confidence. Everything has to evolve around confidence. I can give you some quick figures about confidence through our Biblos Bank Consumer Confidence Index. In March of this year, the index reached its lowest level in 7 years. In April, it reached its lowest level ever since we started calculating the index in July 2007, and we calculated on a monthly basis. In May, it reached a new record low. In the second quarter of this year, we just published those results. The index reached its lowest level on record on a quarterly basis. If you look at the underlying figures, underlying survey of the index, 90% of the surveyed Lebanese believe that their personal financial condition deteriorated from 6 months earlier in June. About the same percentage, 91% thinks their personal financial conditions will further deteriorate by December of this year. 88%, 87% thinks economic conditions deteriorated from 6 months earlier. And about the same percentage thinks economic conditions will further deteriorate by the end of this year. So you see, there is no confidence whatsoever. And the paralysis of this government, I'm not putting the entire blame on this government, but the paralysis of this government for the past 4 months has exacerbated this confidence crisis. And your question is very much to the point. What are the reforms that are needed? At the beginning, we know that structural reforms need time, medium term, long term, but there were about 15 decisions that this government could have implemented immediately upon taking office, and that would have at least maintained the same level of confidence that when it took over. And we still see the paralysis. We see statements by ministers that we should do this and we should do that, but on the ground, nothing really is happening. So definitely you need to start taking measures, and there are easy measures that don't need to wait for an IMF program. And anyway, there are reforms ahead of an IMF program that the IMF will require in any case, such as a capital controls law, such as modifying the 2020 budget to include a medium-term fiscal framework. But you have tangible reforms that the Lebanese citizens need to feel, like reducing telecom costs, like improving the investment climate, the business environment, trying to reduce the operating costs on the private sector, on companies. The operating costs on private sector are an understated obstacle to economic growth. And these are, you look at the ease of doing business survey, 75% of countries around the world have a better business environment than Lebanon. 60% of Arab countries have a better business environment than Lebanon. The Global Competitiveness Index of the World Economic Forum shows that 60% of Arab countries have more competitive economies than Lebanon. The infrastructure needs to be upgraded. Electricity is a huge problem on the economy before being a burden on the treasury. Simple measures, closing 90 public institutions and agencies and independent authorities that we've been hearing for the past 4 years that they are obsolete, or merging them together. There are basic decisions, giving tax relief to companies. There are basic decisions that could have shown the credibility of this government and given confidence to the markets in order to move forward to more serious and medium-term and long-term reforms, irrespective of what happens with the IMF.
So before we move to Ari, just in a couple of words, is it paralysis or ill intentions, or what is it? Why are they not being achieved, in your opinion?
Maybe there is inexperience. Maybe they don't know what are the priorities. I cannot judge from a distance because I'm not part of the deliberations in the Council of Ministers, but it's clear to everybody in the government and outside the government that the situation has deteriorated since this government took office. It could have taken some basic decisions, and it's still up until today, it hasn't taken any decisions to start restoring a minimum amount of confidence, minimum level of confidence.
Thank you. Ari.
Well, I think Nasib is known to be more polite than I am, and more diplomat than I am. And I'll tell you, just the answer to your last question is because they don't care, because they can get away with it, because they don't want to do it. It's as simple as that. I mean, bad intention. I mean, I'm not sure the question of bad intention will hurt them anyways. It's just they don't want to do it. They want to keep on running the country the way it has been run over the last 30 years, and they don't want to change the game. And unfortunately, the street is so silent that it's basically sending them a message that you can continue doing business as you used to, and that's the problem. So let me go back to the structural reform. But don't forget that they don't care. They really don't. And they haven't for 30 years. They're not going to do it today. When it comes to structural reforms, look, at the end of the day, even when when I try to assist in trying to write the plan, the decision is not mine, right? So at the end of the day, the only thing we can do is to be as specific as possible in terms of reform. But people who are sitting around the table at the Council of Ministers, people who are in Parliament are supposedly doing two things, supervision and legislation, are the ones that are supposed to be doing those reforms. And the list is endless. Anti-corruption initiative have been voted. There has been some initiative that have been agreed upon by the Council of Ministers, but they ended up to be just ink on a piece of paper. What is happening about that, I don't know. But it's not very hard to follow up on that. If you want to have exchange of tax information today, you can do that under the CRS. Why nothing is happening? I don't know. Audit, forensic audit, traditional audit, okay? At the level of the central bank, at the level of the all state contracts, at the level of the ministries, all that should happen. It doesn't take rocket scientists to figure it out and to start. Independent judiciary, that should happen. And obviously we know what's happening and how it's being held back at every single level. Electricity, borders control, stopping the subsidies on fuel and gas with all the smuggling that's taking place. capital controls, environmental crisis. I mean, this list can go on and on. They're not doing anything. Not only nothing is happening, but there's nothing, there's a government plan there, and there is nothing, the laws that should accompany that plan are not being drafted, or they are being drafted but kept in a drawer. I have no idea. Since we are talking about the financial sector, one very important thing is the change in the governance of the financial sector. We cannot continue with the way things are happening today. Steve mentioned one thing which I was shocked by hearing, but when he talked about the role of the banks in providing the stability, in providing financial stability of the country. I'm sorry, but the banks, that's not their responsibility. They shouldn't be financing the state if they know that the state has always been rated as a sub-investment security. They shouldn't be exposed to the central bank when they know that the exposure of the central bank is the same as that of the state. Okay, their role is not to provide that financial stability. Their role is to finance the private sector. So there are some of those things that have to change. We cannot continue to have one person, okay, and I'm not talking about the individual, but I'm talking about the role, who is at the same time the head of the central bank, the head of the CMA, the head of all different regulatory agencies. It cannot be, because by definition, those regulatory agencies have sometimes conflicting missions. They do represent different things. An example is CMA is supposed to represent the investor, while the central bank is representing the making sure that there is a solvency in the financial system. Fine. But those two things sometimes don't get along, and we have a number of examples. I'm not going to waste everyone's time here. One last structural adjustment that needs to happen is on the budget revision. I mean, we got into the habit of spending money, and that anything that is not covered by the budget, we're going to have the printing press. The printing press is working so fast that at the eve of the October 17 revolution, we had 6 trillion or thereabout of money in circulation. The last time I checked, I think we are around 20 or 21 trillion. I'm not sure, but it's roughly 3 times more, 3 plus more. We cannot continue on that path. So some of those things need to be structurally changed in the way we approach the economy and the way we approach the financing of the economy.
Thank you so much. I was thinking we might be able to skip this round of rebuttals until Ari, you mentioned this last point. So Nasib, 2 minutes of rebuttals.
Yes, definitely. I agree that the banking sector should not be the only side that is responsible for monetary, financial, economic, and social stability. But in the absence of any vision or any economic plan or any fiscal plan, this vacuum had to be filled by somebody, by a side, and the banking sector found itself obliged to fill this vacuum. It's easy to say that it's not the role of the banking sector to finance the public sector, but it was doing this. It's like a person standing on one leg for all this time, and sooner or later, this person was not going to be able to remain standing on one leg. The financial system, the banking system was the only side that was providing the stability. And if we managed to take advantage of the opportunities that existed, and the last was the Sadr conference, at least, and implementing the very modest reforms that the international community expected, maybe we could have avoided the current crisis. But if it is the absence of any fiscal responsibility, the lack of political will to implement reforms, that led us to where we are today. The banking sector tried to maintain stability and giving one opportunity after the other to political authorities to implement reforms with very clear warnings. And when, for example, the chairman of Byblos Bank, Dr. Francois Basile, several years ago, warned the government that the banks will not continue to finance the state, he got sued by a member of parliament and taken to court for this. So There were warnings, and the political authorities did not take advantage of the opportunities that were presented, especially the sadder opportunities. And now it's time. I agree with Ari. It's time. We cannot run the country like it has been run. It's time to change course. But the financial sector cannot pay the price for what happened. It can bear the cost along with other stakeholders, and especially the depositors should not pay the price, given that their only sin is that they trusted the system and placed their money in Lebanese bank, especially the diaspora, because if you lose the diaspora, you're not going to be able to have a functioning banking sector. And they're watching very closely, and they're very concerned about the messages coming out of Lebanon, and they're watching very closely what happens to their deposits.
Thank you so much. Any remarks, Ari, before we move to the next question?
1 minute.
Yes,
1 minute.
Wonderful, because we have 25 questions from the audience, and we have one more question for you guys to debate.
Okay, just in response to the last comment of Nasib, the depositor should not pay the price, yes, but the people also should not pay the price. And the way ABL is representing the grab on state asset, that's making people who have nothing to do with the crisis pay for a big portion of what happened in the past 30 years. And that is completely unacceptable. What is and should be doable is a more efficient use of public assets, of state assets, put them under private management in order to be able for those to be able to get more revenues out of it, to be able to exploit those assets more, and to agree on a certain mechanism for funding for either the depositors or even people who got hit by financing the losses that existed in the system. That can be done. But what cannot be done is this absurd blind grab of state asset to just protect to cover the mistakes of the past. I promised 1 minute.
Thank you so much. No, that was great. Before we move to questions from the audience, I just wanted to combine the last two questions into one. We've seen numbers being debated in public on the losses. Everybody has an opinion, and as we framed it, the numbers of the losses have become Wijhet Nazar. So can we, in layman terms, explain why there is this difference? Why have we got to a situation where facts and data have become an opinion? And what is your appraisal of the losses? Let's start with you, Ari.
Do you want the polite answer, or do you want the truth?
No, I want the truthful answer.
Well, first, losses are not a point of view. Okay. Now, losses will change, and losses are based. Some parts of the losses are based on assumptions. There's no doubt about it, and we can debate the assumptions. So, for example, if you think about the losses, you will see that there are three buckets. There is one which are the past losses, so losses that have happened. Those are whether they are at the central bank, booked at the central bank as past losses, or they are in the balance sheet of commercial bank as NPLs. Those are losses that will have to be taken. Then you have basically the FX positions, okay? And then you have the impact of the government restructuring. Now, for the first one and the last one, those are not very debatable in the sense that we've put some assumption on government restructuring. It may not end up to be a 75% haircut on that. It may end up to be 60%. Sure, then the number of the losses will change. But the quantum is so large that no matter how you change those variables, okay, it doesn't change the overall result. Yes, you may shave a bit of the losses here or there. However, the problem is you have to be truthful and honest about the approach. You know, this whole way Lebanese way of dealing with things, of hiding things under the carpet, of lying to the international community, of thinking that by lowering the number, I'm going to get away with it, this cannot stand. And the reason this is happening is because you have players out there. You have BDL that doesn't want to show the losses on its balance sheet. You have the ABL that wants to minimize the impact on its equity because that's what they care about, and they do not want to get into a bail-in situation. And you have the politicians who do not want to do reforms. The problem that we have today is that we have a system that is so incestuous in terms of the public sector and the financial private sector that we cannot come to an answer anymore, an honest answer, without hitting both. And we go back to the losses. I mean, should it be third or whatever? I mean, it's first, we don't have the numbers to be able to answer that. But what my point of view is that when you take a look at those losses, you have to have as honest as a perspective as possible. And then the real debate is the debate that needs to happen is how do we finance it? And there, people like Nasib and I that seem to be at two ends of the spectrum, I can assure you that within a week, we can come to an agreement. But let's not try to come to an agreement by hiding the numbers. Let's see once and for all what is the extent of the problem, and let's then discuss the solutions. Unfortunately, the way people have been approaching that is trying to kick the can down the road one more time.
Thank you so much. Nasib.
First of all, I have to disagree strongly about the notion that the banks are trying to grab state assets. Not at all. The contribution of the Association of Banks to the government's plan, and it's a contribution, it's not a replacement of the government's plan, is to solve the issue of the public debt held by the central bank. The central bank is the biggest holder of public debt. Let's not forget that. The defeasance fund that the banking sector has suggested is to have state assets of $40 billion that are entirely owned by the state. The fund will be entirely owned by the states, except that the fund will issue low interest rate bonds for 20 to 30 years to BDL in exchange for the public debt in foreign and local currency that it holds, which will be transfers to the fund and then to the state, and the state can write it off. There's no grab of any state assets. These state assets will remain fully with the state, and there will be an international management firms who will manage them to improve their productivity. So revenues from these entities will continue to stream to the treasury, and with better management, the revenues will increase. If you look, for example, today at the figures that the Minister of Finance released just today, telecom revenues are down 55% in the first 5 months of this year. This is supposed to be a golden egg, a golden goose for the state. Telecom revenues are down 55%. So it's joining the electricity sector in terms of mismanagement and poor results. The second point about the losses, of course, you need to preserve the equity of banks. How do you expect the shareholders to participate in the recapitalization? And the government plan scares away, not only wipes out the entire equity of the banks, but it scares away shareholders by forcing them to give up the dividend they received in the previous 4 years. You need to provide incentives for these shareholders to recapitalize their banks, not to scare them away. And when you provide incentives without wiping out the entire equity of the banks, and banks realize that they will have to take part of the losses. Nobody's denying that there are losses, and the banks will absorb part of them, including on the non-performing loans of the private sector, which the government plan overestimates as well, according to the Banking Control Commission, not according to the Association of Banks. Then yes, you will have. I go back to the confidence part. You will have shareholders who will be ready to participate in the recapitalization of banks. But today, according to that plan, there's no incentive for existing shareholders to participate in the recapitalization of the plan. And when you see one of the items in the government plan that says the government will require special powers, additional powers to restructure the financial sector, the grab is the state grabbing the banking sector. It's not the banking sector grabbing state assets. It's the exact other way around.
Thank you so much. So let's move to rebuttals. And in your rebuttals, maybe if you can end us on a slightly less negative note on whether we can align interests in a way such that we can save the situation for the good of the people. Over to you, Henri.
Let me first ask you a question. What's the format for the rest? Is this the end of the session, or we're going to take Q&A from?
We're going to take Q&A.
Oh, okay, okay. Look, there's a there are a number of things that I still say what I said at the beginning, that I don't think when I look at the government plan, I don't think we are far from each other. It seems to be more aggressive. It seems to be more emotional. It seems that the position are farther away. So let's take one example, okay, which is the state assets. We, in the government plan, we are saying that state assets should be managed in a better way. However, there is a big difference between having access to the revenue stream or to the cash flow stream, let me be more specific, out of these assets, or having a claim on these assets. And when you have a defeasance company, and I know we don't have enough time to go through all the specifics of that, and you put 40 billion worth of assets in it, and then you attach to it a debt of 40 billion. We know very well, we've seen that movie before, we know very well where it's going to go. The fact that we're saying, oh, this is under the ownership of the state today, I mean, you know, it's just smoke and mirrors here. So structure can be done, the use of state asset in order to be to get a better cash flow out of it under private management is agreed upon. I mean, it is in the plan. So the question is, to what extent, what kind of cursor do you want to put, and how much of that stream should go for the stability of the financial system? That can be discussed, okay? The same thing, I need the banks. When I say I mean as a citizen more than as a government, but to help the government in terms of doing the reform, the anti-corruption reform, in order to trace those stolen assets, that stolen money. I need them. The anti-corruption initiative didn't disappear suddenly from, you know, the treasury coffers and went out, bam, from the treasury coffers all the way to that ill-gotten people. So we need to work together on that, because if not, then the claim of saying we want reforms is not going to be truthful. So there's a lot of cooperation from the private sector in order for the reform to be able to take place. Now, you tell me, do the politicians want really to implement, to do those reforms? Do they really want to open up the books? Then that's a totally different issue, and probably the answer is no. But we have to try to move into that direction. Now, so I think if we put all those different, because again, we don't have numbers, and I see some of the questions say, well, give us numbers. Well, I'm sorry, but I have only the numbers that I'm dealt with. There are a lot of numbers that need to be in the toolbox to try to understand effectively the impact of different items of the government plan that I do not have access to, that we don't have access to until today. And we need the cooperation of all the parties in order to be able to refine. However, what I do think is that there are enough lines of defense, once again, in order to be able to protect as many depositors as possible from this financing losses.
Thank you so much. Nasib?
I fully agree with Henri that we need to cooperate all together to find a solution and a common vision. And I wish the government remembered this before it was, when it was deliberating the decision to default on the Eurobonds or not. It did not involve the banking sector in its decision. It did not involve the banking sector in its decision when it was formulating the first draft of its plan that was leaked in early April, or the final version of its plan that was distributed at the end of April of this year. And now, with the discussions taking place between the Association of Banks and the government, it seems for me, from a distance, that the government is trying to say, okay, we are sitting down with the Association of Banks based on its request, but effectively what the government is doing is telling the IMF, we tried, we sat with the ABL, and we did not reach an agreement, so that's it. I agree with Ari that we need to make more efforts to sit together and find a common vision and a common road to start the reform process and to reach an agreement with the IMF.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I mean, there's no end to this conversation, and I think we covered some ground, but there's still a lot to talk about. Of course, we promised the audience a Q&A. So if you'll allow me, I'll read a few questions, and feel free, the audience can raise their hands and intervene verbally if they want to, but I'll choose a number of questions. We have already around 30. So one question is how a legislation of capital control will re-establish confidence. It did not work in Argentina in late 90s. Would you impose a capital control on non-resident deposits and still think they will send their USD to Lebanon? Another question was on, particularly to Nassib, if this is a liquidity crisis and not a solvency crisis. The Association of Banks in Lebanon's plan mentions a debt defiance fund effectively based on a $40 billion valuation of state assets. Is that realistic? It seems suspiciously equal to the exact losses at BDL Charles writes. So let's take these two questions, and then we'll come back for more. Who would like to start?
Well, I can very quickly, just on the capital control. I think we definitely need capital control law. We actually needed it before October 17, to tell you the truth, because the problems of liquidity in the country started way before that. But we need it because when we think about the solution, the overall solution to financing the losses, we need to have first, and probably you're going to tell me between October 17 and today, we effectively, that argument is already void, because whatever dollars that existed also still within the banking system have left. But we need to make sure that everyone is treated equally in this country. And today there is such an exceptionalism from one bank to another. I mean, I'm not even talking from one customer to the other within the same bank. From one bank to the other, people are lost. We spend so much time trying to figure out what to do and how to finance our personal budgets every month. There's a sort of even when you have discussions with the international organization in terms of how you're going to finance this with all these moving pieces of the puzzle, fresh dollars coming in, and suddenly the local dollars keep on increasing in the country. I mean, if you look at the numbers, we were at 120 billion, and probably Nassib can correct me on the exactitude of these numbers, but on September 30, and we are still at 117 or 116, something like that, $billion within the commercial banking sector, although there has been a change in the mix. So we need to make sure that all the different pieces of the puzzle are not moving anymore. And maybe I'll let Nassib answer while I remember what the second question was.
No, I think the second question was addressed to Nassib anyway.
Yes. The capital controls law is a must. I fully agree with Ari. At least it should have been put in place in November. It has been a request of the Association of Banks since then. it's the person who asked the question said that it didn't work in Argentina. In the case of Lebanon, it will formalize and legalize and brings transparency and normalize the maybe not normalize, but it will regularize the transfers abroad and withdrawals from banks. Even the draft law that is now in the parliament does not even address withdrawals from banks, local withdrawals from banks. It only addresses foreign transfers. And the capital controls law is a prerequisite of the IMF, by the way. It definitely would have helped if it was passed or implemented in November at that time, and we've wasted so much time not passing that law. And this is one piece of legislation that is part of a much bigger reform plan that needs to be put in place. So if we're stalling 6 months now on the capital controls law, that should be easy to do. It's not labor intensive, and that requires the political will, and we have plenty of legislators who are lawyers in parliament who can draft it, and the IMF has provided its input on the draft law, and still it has not passed up until today. You see the obstacles to reforms. Regarding the other question, no, it's not suspiciously the exact size of the public debt held by the central bank. It is meant to cover the debt held by the central bank in a way to protect depositors and avoid reaching them through a haircut. It's meant exactly to do that. The assets of the states exceed the size of the public debt. But what the Association of Banks is suggesting is to address the debt held by the central bank in a way to address this component of the losses. I have 2 points here in this regard. The government's plans give the suggestion that it has been written and developed simply to meet the IMF's objectives, regardless of what it does to the Lebanese economy. It does not even prioritize growth. At least that's the impression most people have. And the priority should have been to expand the size of the Lebanese economy, to promote growth, to reduce obstacles to growth. While the perception is that this plan is aiming to please the IMF and goes and assumes that the IMF is coming with preconditions, and it's not. I know it's not coming with preconditions. It has certain expectations, but it's not coming with preconditions. So the second point is that there are alternatives to this. Is instead of looking at the debt as a bookkeeping accounting, the losses at the bookkeeping accounting process that has to be written off in one shot, there are alternatives like looking at instead of looking them as a stock, we can look at them on a net present value basis over 30 years, 40 years. And that would smooth the process as well. So there are alternatives, but again, I agree with Henri that we need to be on the same page and have the will to sit down and look at various options.
Great. So there are a number of comments. I'll just mention maybe a few quickly. So one says that you can't start talking about distribution of losses before doing structural reforms, especially in the power sector. And I think that while that's correct, I think that the government plan does acknowledge that. There was a question, a two-part question. So what do we think of a currency board to have stabilized the foreign exchange price of the lira? And attached to that was, is there any aptitude for having a forensic audit on who really gained from the party of the past 30 years?
Well, if just in terms of the losses and the distribution of the losses, we don't have, as I said earlier, we don't have time. I think really time is of the essence here, and I don't know why there seems to be no urgency within the government in general and the people negotiating right now with ABL in terms of sitting down with the IMF again. I mean, I don't know if you recall the last time we had a meeting. I mean, I can't recall anymore that there was a there was a meeting with the IMF. I don't know if it was a week ago, 10 days ago, 2 weeks ago. We're in the middle of a crisis. We're in the middle of a disastrous situation, and yet things don't, seem to be going at a very leisurely pace. Waiting for the reform to be taken before the losses are absorbed by the financial system. Again, that is something we don't have the luxury of the time. We need to move in parallel across all these issues, in my mind. And once again, and I want to go back to something that Nassib said earlier, dealing with those losses immediately is very important. Having a flow approach to it will not lead to a sustainable debt to GDP ratio, and therefore will keep us exposed to any macro shock that may happen again in this region in the future. And most probably, and I won't be revealing a secret here, but I'm not sure that the IMF will not take that into consideration. Even the debt to GDP ratio that we had in our plan we're still high by typical IMF standards. So I'm not sure that doing the flow thing is going to be helpful. And yes, we need a plan that is acceptable to the IMF. There's no doubt about it. And we will have to negotiate preconditions. We will have to negotiate fully with the IMF. And I do take it that there is an IMF representative on the call as a participant. We will have to negotiate all that. But we need a plan that is solid enough that will be able to get us and attract us dollars. Without the IMF, and as I said, by the way, in my resignation letter, there's no plan B, there's no plan Z. At least that's my opinion. There is no plan available without having the IMF on board. The international support group will not give us the additional budgetary support that we need. Said funds will not be released. The international banking community will not look at us in the same way. Capital markets, international capital markets will not look at us in the same way. We need the IMF. And that doesn't mean that we will do whatever they want us to do, but we need something that is scientifically solid in order to be able to negotiate with them in good faith and being able to negotiate the key parameters. Now, on the forensic, I will just say, yes, we need a forensic everywhere. We need forensic, as I said earlier, across all the different state-owned enterprises. We need to figure out exactly who took what, because it's only by doing so that we will be able to lessen the blow on the financial sector.
Thank you. Nassib?
The first question is about the currency board. To solve the liquidity problem, the liquidity crisis, I think a currency board comes at a later stage. It's not going to solve the currency crisis. The currency crisis will be solved when you start to restore confidence. And when you restore confidence, you restore it through reforms, through an agreement with the IMF that will generate liquidity, that will inject liquidity into the market. And later on, the currency board may be debated. In some countries, it succeeded. In some countries, it has not succeeded. This is an idea that has been floated by at least one member of parliament, but this comes at a later stage. Regarding the other point about reforming first the energy sector before addressing the financial losses, definitely, because the perception now is that, as I said at the beginning, if you assign the financial losses, then there is no more incentives. At least the perception is that there is no more incentives by this political class to reforms, or at least it's a way to avoid the reform. That's a very strong perception that that locally and internationally exists. That, you put the losses on the financial sector and you're done. So you don't have you have moral hazard now. You don't have any incentive to reform the electricity sector or other sectors. And as far as the forensic audit, we should have started with the forensic audit of dozens of public institutions, starting with Électricité de Liban and the electricity sector, which is the cause of half of the public debt, of about $45 billion in public debt, whether direct transfers or interest accumulated, or at least having the forensic audit of the central bank in parallel to the forensic audit of the electricity sector. This would have given more credibility to this government. But starting and stopping at the central banks and then just giving token statements about the need to audit the other public institution, it simply doesn't hold. It should have been in parallel, the central bank and at least Électricité du Liban, not to mention dozens of other public institutions that need to be audited, and ministries and councils and funds.
Brilliant. I think we'll take one last question before we wrap up. I know we're stepping a bit over time. Would the banks agree, or the Association of Banks agree, to repeal the banking privacy laws so we could accurately estimate who gained and how much they gained since the early 90s? And what are the consequences of that, I suppose? And the other question is, I think we covered most of the other questions, actually, so there were very common threads. So maybe let's take this one on banking secrecy, and if there's any final remarks that you guys wish to make.
Look, I'm sure Nassib is going to have a totally different view on this. I think banking secrecy has played an important role in the 50s when it was enacted, and over the several decades after that. I think today we live in a totally different environment. I think today in this is not the competitive asset that we want to have to rebuild the financial sector. We want a fully transparent one. We want, and I'm sure, by the way, and you will see that a lot of the supposedly forensic audit work that we all want, or we all say we want on this code, is going to hit the wall of the banking secrecy. Oh, sorry, you cannot take a look at this. Oh, you cannot take a look at that. There's banking secrecy, and there's a huge, very long procedure that we will have to go through. So basically, the forensic audit will be dead. There's no reason whatsoever in 2020 to be able to have such law on our books. I think this should be repealed, and that should be part of the structural reform. And if we really want structural reform in this country, that is the first thing we need to do.
Thank you, Ari. Before we move to Nassib, I'm just going to remind everyone that we'll be launching the second poll for this evening, which will be the same as the beginning, and after Nassib's intervention, we'll show the results.
I have been saying way before the crisis, when I used to be asked about banking secrecy, especially with the advent of the FATCA law or the exchange of tax information law, that if a potential depositor wants to place his or her deposits in Lebanese banks only because of banking secrecies, banks don't want these deposits. You already had the Special Investigation Commission, who has the powers to recommend the lifting of banking secrecy, plus you have the other laws that the banking sector had to abide by. Eventually, it's the responsibility of Parliament to modify, to suspend, to change the banking secrecy law. And whatever Parliament decides, the banking sector will implement. So it's not a sacred cow that we cannot touch. It's something in the hands of Parliament, and it's up to Parliament to decide what to do with this law. And the banking system, whether the central bank or the commercial banks, will abide by it in full.
Thank you so much. Are there any final remarks you wish to make before we move to the poll? No? Okay, excellent. So maybe if we can see the results of the poll. So 21% believe that the government plan distributed losses fairly, 33% are undecided, and 45% said no, they do not believe that the government plan distributed the losses fairly. I'm not sure if we're going to see the second one. I think this was at the beginning. No, perhaps not.
We're just waiting for the votes to come in.
Okay.
Can you put back the ones before? Sorry.
Yes, I will in a second.
Okay.
If anybody else hasn't voted, please go ahead.
I think somebody in the audience has a question.
Hello.
Hello.
Yes. So actually, concerning the poll, I think the set of answers could be incomplete because what do you mean by unfairly? Some people could think that it's unfair against the banks, whereas some people might think that it's unfair that the banking sector should be paying more. So
fair enough. Thank you for your intervention. I think we spent quite a good chunk of the debate trying to understand what is a fair distribution of the losses, yep. But this will inevitably be interpreted very subjectively. Diana, are we seeing the first results now or the second?
The first results. Henri wanted to see them again.
Okay, so the first results were 21, 33, 45. And the second is 39, 6, 55. So there's more shift from the undecided to the yes, which is a good sign. Of course, there's still polarization in the opinions, and I think that's an artifact of the question itself. And yes, please.
I don't know if I would blame the questions. Look, it's a very difficult thing. What the country is going through right now is probably, I lived through the Civil War, and I've seen different phases also when we went through a devaluation of the currency in the late 80s. I think what we're going through, the country has never experienced it. I've never seen images of Lebanon the way it is today. So the fact that everyone is paying a price, a certain price in one way or another, think about the people who are on a minimum salary, or people who are, used to be making the equivalent of $800 before the currency started depreciating. These guys are living on $100 or $120 a month. Poverty is at 50%. We're talking about Lebanon here. So it's very, very, very difficult. So I can understand the polarization. And communication is going to be key. Talking about the type of Lebanon we want. Look, I have my views, Nassib has his views, you have your views, and they're not going to be necessarily overlapping. So that dialogue needs to happen very openly in order to be able to allocate the losses in a targeted manner. It's very important. We need to make sure that we take advantage of this crisis to reshape the Lebanon that the people want. I mean, it's not my opinion or Nassib's opinion. Hopefully, I can impact that and I can influence people. But at the end of the day, if people want to go back to the same system, if there are parliamentary election next year or 2022, whenever there are, and they want to bring the same people back into power, you know what? I mean, I don't know how many times we have to keep on trying to tell people that this is not the right thing or we want a different system. But at the end of the day, we live in a system where people have the last vote. So it's extremely important to explain to people. We have 2 years to do that, to show them, what are the pros and cons of this system or that other system, to explain to them the policy alternative that they have, and to show them the impact that it may have on their lives.
Absolutely. No, thank you so much for this intervention. And I fully agree. I think part of this series of debates, and of course, it's not just this debate series. I think one of the most beautiful things we've seen over the past 9 months in Lebanon is this flourishing of مساحات نقاش, places to actually debate and discuss the pressing issues and make them more salient to everyone, so that everyone can participate actively as citizens in this debate, because it does affect us all, and there is no easy way out, naturally. With that, I'd like to first thank you both for joining us today. It has been a real pleasure listening to this debate. I think naturally this is not something that we can close on and say we've agreed on a set of issues or not, but I think there are common denominators, and as both of you have mentioned in your interventions, perhaps more conversations and more dialogue can bring us to agree on this set of common denominators, and then try and expand. So thank you so much for taking the time. Thank you for everyone who has attended this debate. Please check out Impact Lebanon and Coffee and Politics on social media. And if you have any further questions, please reach out to any of us. Thank you so much.
We had an amazing 90 minutes without an electricity outage, which is unbelievable.
Yes, fantastic.
Can I add something?
That's not the news that we're getting from Lebanon, right? We're expecting more outages to come. Yes, please, Nasib.
To continue along with what Henri is saying, but in a different way, in a quantitative way, the opportunity costs that the Lebanese citizens and the Lebanese economies are paying are enormous and are accumulating. We estimate output losses, which is the difference between potential GDP and actual GDP growth. Between 2011 and 2019, the output losses, or what I call the opportunity lost on the Lebanese economy, total $44 billion, which is equivalent to 9.5% of GDP. This is the opportunity cost to the Lebanese economy from the indifference of the people in power. And those losses are mounting in 2020 at a much more rapid rate than they did between 2011 and 2019. So we don't have time to waste at all. Every day that is we delay reforms is increasing the cost, the output losses on the Lebanese economy and on Lebanese citizens.
It's tragic, and perhaps this is a good time to reiterate the calls for action, for transparency, for dialogue, and try and move forward. So with that, I'd like to thank you again, and hopefully we'll get another opportunity to talk with you again.
Thank you, Henri.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.